there. So before I jump into the content here, I want to give you kind of just a quick level set. For the past 12 to 18 months or so, I've been spending a lot of time working with early stage founders who are AI native, building for this new world, as well as CMOs, marketing teams from established companies that are repositioning themselves for the AI era. And I think for all of us, we're trying to figure out, so what's happening in marketing? Like, where do we fit in this world? And especially for those of us that have been in the practice now for quite some time. And so what this content is going to represent is effectively what I've learned so far. How did we get here in the first place? And then hopefully it's a proposal, a idea to kind of put in front of all of you to say, here's what I think might come next, or here's what I think might be the next chapter of marketing. And so it's a work in progress, but I really do think in this era where so much is unknown, the more we can kind of share thoughts and share our ideas live, I think the better we'll all be for it. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I call the session the end of marketing. I promise it won't be all depressing. Maybe the first 5 minutes or so might be. But again, let me know in the comments. I've got the comment wall up here as well. Happy to hear your feedback along the way. So by way of flow here, again, I won't spend too much time introducing myself, but just really quickly for those that haven't met yet, my name is Anthony Canada. I'm the co-founder of a company called Goldenhour. We'll talk about why marketing is potentially at existential risk, at least marketing as we define it today. We'll talk about how we got here. And again, maybe it's okay to let some of what we've called marketing kind of go by the way of automation. So let's have that conversation and then talk about what might come next. And again, I'll kind of monitor questions here in the chat, but we'll spend some time afterwards kind of diving deep into the questions as well. So with that, let me go ahead and dive in. So for those that haven't met yet, again, my name is Anthony Canada. I grew up, like many of you, in the sort of cloud, kind of on-prem to cloud platform shift and transformation over the last 15, 20 years. And so started my career at a company called Box back in 2009, had the opportunity to be the head of marketing pre-revenue for a company that would be called Gainsight. And over time, over the course of 7 years, grow into the CMO role there, build that business to over 100 million of ARR during my tenure, and eventually part of it sort of positioned by Vista Equity Partners in 2020. And I think a big part of that experience, it was this idea of creating a category, starting a movement, even in B2B, starting a movement, and kind of borrowing from what a lot of our friends in the consumer world were doing and trying to apply that into the B2B kind of marketing playbook. So that's really where I feel like I fell in love with the practice, if it's fair to say. Made a shift after a couple more CMO roles to becoming a founder. And I started a company called Audience Plus. We ran for about 3 years. And now kind of spitting out of Audience Plus, building a company called Goldenhour, which we'll share more about. Super early days for us still. But again, like many of you, if I had to kind of name maybe what was this era, if we look back to the last maybe 15, 20 years or so, you can call it the marketing automation era or inbound marketing. And I think, to oversimplify what our kind of core job was as marketers, we had to come up with creative means to drive qualified traffic to our own surfaces, like our website, our landing pages, whatever the case may be. We needed to present enough content offers, be it a webinar like this one or whatever we're calling this, a live stream, or a ebook that's gated or an invitation to join an in-person event. And we wanted to sort of convert that qualified traffic to becoming an owned sort of member of our database. And then if we're being honest, what do? We would score that lead. We would email everyone And then they would either unsubscribe because they were frustrated with how many emails we were sending them, or 1 to 2% of them would convert to actually take a demo of our product. And that was sort of the rhythm that we were kind of employing as a practice. And at the end of it, of course, having the sort of attribution argument of, okay, was that a marketing generated lead or opportunity? Was it sales? And how do we sort of kind of arm wrestle over credit for who drove that conversion? And again, a lot of good kind of came from this era as well. So I don't want to dissuade that. We think about this function of demand generation was really born out of the marketing automation movement. Call it growth marketing in some contexts, call it revenue marketing. But ultimately, the CMO got a seat at the revenue table. We were no longer sort of perceived as the arts and crafts sort of marketers. We were perceived as revenue drivers, strategic to the growth of the business. So this was a good thing. And all of us, again, or many of us sort of growing up in that world. But a lot happened. A lot happened in the years since the heyday of Inbound and Marketo, Marketing Nation Summit, and Eloqua, and all of these sort of players that really championed this movement. And I think it really started in 2020 with COVID. We were all dealing with the uncertainty of a global pandemic. We all moved remote, if we weren't already, for most of the global economy. At least buying software sort of stopped, if not for a little while. And so we had to deal with extremely painful layoffs and trying to extend runway if you're kind of living in the startup world. And so this was a very painful, uncertain, trying time for all of us, but even for marketers, right? And what happened out of 2020 was actually quite unexpected. We, of course, saw the zero interest rate policy getting deployed. And all of a sudden, everything became abundant. Startups were getting funded that maybe shouldn't have been funded to begin with, raising incremental rounds, valuations started taking off. Highly funded startups were selling to other highly funded startups. And so we had this sort of rhythm of revenue growth that became, quite good in 2020, 2021, if not for a short while. And then, of course, in 2022, we woke up to the fact that was probably a bad idea. Now we had overinflated cap tables, valuations that were unrealistic to kind of where the businesses truly were valued. And the name of the game for marketing was efficient growth. For a lot of us, that meant looking back to the ZERP era decisions that we made, perhaps around hiring a ton of people that were in different states and countries, and finding ways to sort of find efficiencies there. For many of us, we were either a part of or having to administer a layoff, another one, maybe even a third. And so 2022 to 2023 was a pretty tough season of just coming out of this ping-ponging within the marketing practice. And then, of course, in November of 2023, OpenAI introduces ChatGPT to the world. And of course, this all started, no one knew for sure kind of what this would become, at least for those of us in perhaps in the knowledge work kind of category. But we know the mandate came. It's like, okay, well, now we want this sort of efficient growth charter to remain the case, but start using AI and start figuring out ways to scale using these tools. And I think for a lot of us, we're still kind of living in this case, in this world. There's some emerging use cases. There's some really good products that are coming to market with a lot of promise around the sort of agentic kind of marketing or revenue teams of the future. But the reality is today, for most of us, we're still sort of experimenting and trying to figure out, what can we do in Claude? What can we do, with sort of this purpose-built tool? What can we build ourselves? And I think that this added stress has certainly caused just a continuation of disruption now 6 years in from the heyday of marketing automation. Again, I hope I haven't depressed everyone yet, but the reality is that very playbook that we've built our entire careers on, in many cases, just doesn't work anymore. It just the audience is getting smarter about these kind of conversion and email kind of nurture strategies. The channels are changing, the mediums of content are changing, but also AI is just existentially impacting how we think about how commerce is going to be getting done in this sort of next era. So we're reeling from all of this as a practice. And so you can understand why the CMO role continues to be one of the shortest tenures within the enterprise, or within any kind of organization, at least across the C-suite. So again, this isn't, again, meant to, there is encouragement coming out of this, but I think setting context for how we got here is an important starting point. And I think where this is leading us is to a place where the way we've defined marketing, the way we've sort of structured our teams, our own day-to-day as marketing leaders and CMOs has to fundamentally be different in this new world. And maybe for parts of that, that's okay. So here's why this is increasingly an important conversation for us to have. Many of you might have seen this research. I think it's about 3 weeks old now, maybe a month old, from Anthropic, which is like light years or Stone Ages now in terms of how fast things are moving. But when we look at the chart on the right, what Anthropic is showing is the theoretical level of coverage that AI can have on any given practice within the modern economy. And what red is showing is how far are we today in terms of capturing that potential. And it's no surprise that business and arts and media are two of the leading red areas, the two of the leading occupational categories that have already seen disruption and automation for our practice. So we know that we are one of the first functions within the broader knowledge work category that is becoming increasingly automated, or at least that these use cases are becoming automated. And so the conviction and sort of what I'm waking up to is that within the next, 3 years, maybe a lot sooner, about 80% of what we've called marketing will be automated. We will be using agents and orchestrating the work of agents. This isn't all hey, we're not going to have like a career type of conversation, but the methods and the means and the way the work gets done will be more agentic led than human led. And we know it's already happening. It's already happening specifically within the performance marketing context. Anthropic shared this again about a month ago now, where their entire performance marketing execution was being run by a single non-technical hire using Claude to execute their performance marketing. Pretty wild type stuff. And you see some of the early use cases for where agentic tools like Profound and GrowthX and others, AirOps, are really starting with the AEO, SEO type use cases, the transactional marketing that we know AI can do a really good job of. And so we're seeing the first kind of bits within the of automation within the marketing practice on the performance side. And so my conviction is performance marketing more broadly, call it demand generation more broadly, is becoming more and more of an engineering problem than it is a core marketing problem. And we've already seen some of this right before, in many teams, growth actually rolls into the product organization instead of rolling into the marketing organization. And so we've already seen a little bit of that early indicators, even before AI has fully kind of like the wave had fully crested. But when you think about SEO and AEO, when you think about generating a multitude of ad creatives that could be tested and experimented with, and conversion sort of optimization based on different use cases, we can now prompt our way into delivering that body of work, understanding the data and scaling in a way that just no human could possibly keep up with. And so what I want to ask and what I want to kind of propose to the group is that in some cases, like maybe that's okay. Maybe that our role as it is evolving, again, like this isn't all just hey, what are we going to do professionally for the next, season of our careers? But the way we work has to evolve to lean into these tools, right? And lean into adopting it, especially around the performance marketing context. So with that being the case, what might come next? What might be sort of the next big wave of marketing, or a redefinition of marketing in a world where performance marketing or demand becomes much more of an engineering problem? Well, we have to also have the conversation of what happens to our companies in a world where we're all just using AI to do the same things. We're using the same foundational models. We have smart people that are using kind of clever prompts. We're coloring that context with our own kind of proprietary point of view or customer or overall kind of data. Everyone starts looking the same. And we already see it. How every day I see 3 to 5 new launch videos in my feed, and all of them look the same. All of them feel the same. We're all saying the same things. You see the billboards if you're in the Bay Area up and down the 101. And in a world where we're sounding the same, looking the same, starting to feel the same, the risk is that your company, your brand gets lost in the sea of sameness. Everything just isn't, there's nothing sort of unique or distinct. And it's so hard then in that, if you follow that through line, to monetize and be able to actually generate the revenue growth that we want to grow. And so I believe that what this leads us to is a distinction crisis in a world where we have to rely on the customer's timing and the customer's willingness to sort of be in market and ready to buy software. The fact that they even know who we are as a brand and they can find us in a world where there's several alternatives perhaps, and all the purchasing power belongs to the client and what they're willing to spend versus our ability to command value or create a sense of value around our offering, perhaps even bigger and beyond what our products create today. Now, the good news here is that this is a problem that many are recognizing. The smartest minds in the Valley are kind of confirming that in a world where products are becoming more commoditized in the sense of our ability to create new solutions, more crowded competitively, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to get the distribution, to stand out, to be known and recognized by your potential customer. And this is the existential question. So the good news here is, in a world where traditional marketing is ending, our need to actually build relationship with our audience, our need to stand out, to have something compelling to say, to break through the noise, is becoming the existential question for the intelligence era. This is good news for all of us. Good news for folks that believe in the power of storytelling and community and these types of things. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this is, as you've heard sort of the claim, but there's never been actually a more important time for marketers to help usher in this new era of our industry. And part of the good news of that is that as long as there's humans that are buying things, I do see, you hear about a world where agents are selling to other agents, and how do we sort of tune kind of help agents understand our product value proposition. I view that as like a really good but I think at the end of the day, people buy from people. And when we make purchasing decisions, we make them emotionally. The data is pretty clear here that we buy things from brands we trust, brands we're familiar with, and we have preference. And you can carry it on to your personal kind of purchasing habits. Like you go to, maybe if you're in San Francisco, do you go to Blue Bottle, or do you go to Pete's, or do you go to Phil's? Is the coffee like that dramatically different? Maybe on Pete's, but no, don't quote me on that. It tends to be fairly similar. Sure, Blue Bottle might be a little bit more acidic or whatever, but you choose Phil's for a reason, or you choose Blue Bottle for a reason. And so I think similarly, the same can be said and is true of enterprise software. And we are bigger, and the sort of like ability to create sort of this emotional connection with our audience is much bigger than just the product value proposition, just the product marketing, just the feature function. And I think many folks have seen and appreciated this, but it's also important in that the overwhelming majority, almost all of our audience that is paying attention, is not in market today for our products and services. But they're listening. They're joining events like this. I'm not trying to sell you anything right now, honestly, but we're creating sort of value with an audience that we care deeply about, and in an attempt to build a relationship or extend the relationship that we've built as a brand. And so for the 5% of our audience who's in market, ready to buy, performance marketing, engineering problem, orchestrating an army of agents to help us kind of take advantage of that opportunity and help serve them in a way that's aligned to our values and aligned to sort of the experience we want to create for our customers. Great, let's do it. But what do we do with the 95%? How do we build that emotional relationship with them? By the way, I found this really cool comic. I guess 95.5 is officially such a meme that there's an actual comic about it. And so screenshot this if you're interested, or just make fun of me for continuing to bang the 95.5 drum, but I think it's an important one. So that's the question then. The question is, in a world where traditional marketing as we know it goes by the way of agents, we continue to operate a team of humans who are familiar with the tools, accountable to the outcome. They can orchestrate the workflows and the tools, and have deep appreciation for the data. They can enable the sellers kind of more broadly, still a role. What do we do with this 95%? This existential question that Andrew Chen and others are leading us into it. And that's where I believe we will see a resurgence of brand, or we will come back to the pre-2000 era marketing charter, which is pretty close to this idea, right? To build that emotional relationship with an audience, and fundamentally to do it in a way that drives impact, that thanks to our digital connection and the channels that we have, we can leverage our kind of the broader kind of toolkit of brand building to actually drive revenue and drive outcomes. Again, not to suggest demand gen goes away completely, but I think the focal point for marketing shifts. And one might suggest, do we even call it marketing anymore? Or do we kind of fully enable around the brand idea? I don't know, but it's worth pursuing. What I've observed is that even the most iconic brands of this era are leaning into building brands that are human and that exhibit or exhibit some type of human attribute to how they show up. You think about OpenAI, Anthropic, like these should be like the Terminator brands, right? Like cold, and the websites are like white and black and like totally like lacking in emotional context, right? But you look at the brand campaigns with ChatGPT in particular. This came out, I think, in around December of last year or something along those lines. It was warm and nostalgic and extremely human. And what they talked about was less of the bits and bytes, but the outcome of the product and the usage of their product and how that will inevitably impact humanity for the better. Claude challenging us to keep thinking, to pushing the boundaries, and again, doing it in a way that is extremely human-led. So the sort of point of view that I think is starting to form for me, and you've seen it maybe if you followed our podcast at all, is that this idea of brand humanity, of building brands that exhibit this human connection, this human point of view, is what will separate us from being known from our audience or being lost in the sea of sameness. That's the belief. And so what does that look like exactly? So on the left side of the column here, I've got 6, again, human attributes. We need a better name for this. Like what makes us human, and what is a job to be done that belongs to the human and AI can never replace. One is being authentic. And we'll talk about these at length here. Being able to build an emotional connection with an audience. I've already hit on that. The art of creativity. The idea that building things that are beautiful is something that really matters to us. And I'll unpack that one. And enrolling our audience or even our teammates internally with a deep sense of purpose, shared mission, being able to build connection at scale with our audience, and to facilitate a sense of belonging for people who care and people who see themselves in this movement that we are waging. So everything on the left column, I'll propose, is a fundamental thing that makes us human, and something that in a world that AI could even do it, we would still choose humanity to do that work. And on the right, I'll step through this, but these are where I see kind of the main marketing programs and investments for us as we go forward. The new playbook, and again, I don't know the shape it takes, but I think these are the raw ingredients that would make up that new playbook. And so we'll start with founder voice. And we know that, again, people follow people. we know that even algorithmically, right, the brand accounts and company accounts are not getting the reach and engagement that a individual account does on LinkedIn or X, or name your kind of platform of choice. And so the idea is, how do we appeal to a broader audience? People want to see the people behind the company, and they want to know, who are you? Like, what do you stand for? How are you committed to actually leading the market in this way? And so I think there's something deeply meaningful about our ability as marketers to help put our founders in a position to be the spokesperson for the brand, to be the figurehead, the embodiment, if you will, of the brand that we want to build. For a lot of us, that's extremely uncomfortable. For if you're an introvert, or you aren't comfortable on camera, or like literally don't want to do it, I believe this is becoming a core part of the job description, that we're going from the maybe 2010s and prior, having kind of approved spokespeople who have been media trained and so on, to just showing up authentically, often online, and being sort of present in front of the audience. And so I think this pulls back to this idea of how to build authenticity and showing up with authenticity as a brand. Critically important. We also know that great brands develop emotional storytelling. And obviously these are kind of cheesy consumer examples here, but no one thinks about Nike specifically as just a shoe company, right? They could have positioned themselves as a shoe company, but they're all about finding your greatness, striving for greatness, right? And so I have the belief that this matters in B2B too. That while, especially in a world where your category might be crowded, and all your competitors are positioning around more of that product marketing motion, which is important. Don't get me wrong, we have to do it. Talking about your what, or talking about your how, but articulating your why in a way that is true within your audience, in a way that your audience actually can say it back to you and see themselves in the brand that you're building, is an incredible unlock for connection. And it sets you apart. And so practically, what does this look like? I think going from a world, again, where we're just having our product marketing kind of messaging architecture, but then building that back up to telling a bigger story around, how does the work that we do impact culture, impact our audience, our community, maybe impact the world writ large at scale. And doing it in a way that is emotionally stirring, I think, is a really important way to tell stories in this new world. This is the one I'm being open here. I think I'm struggling with this a little bit, but there, we saw obviously, Nano Banana, for those that have used kind of image generation tools. Claude just released like a Figma competitor. So we know that AI is certainly generating visual assets, generating in some contexts, even mood boarding and some brand kind of design work. I'm a big user of Lovable. I'm blown away by the sort of landing pages and the design that I'm able to do through the tool. But I don't know. I believe that if you play this out all the way, we're never going to be a culture or a society that goes to museums to see the art created by AI, or waits around the corner for a restaurant with a Optimus chef that is just like cooking the perfect steak or whatever it is, or marveling at city planning that is perfectly pixel whatever. I think there is something innate in our humanity that we love to see the beauty that is created around us, and I don't think that is completely disconnected from the digital experience. And so my belief is, and you've probably already seen it looking at, I don't know, we'll call anyone out, but maybe some of the AI 50 companies, you look at their websites, a lot of them kind of look the same, right? The navigation is sort of the same, or one of 3 or 4 different options. Sometimes the color palette looks the same. And I just wonder if that's a trend, or the start of something else, where we kind of come back to this idea of building bespoke, beautiful brands that are activated through incredible digital experiences, and how that kind of carries forward. I think that there's room for us to continue to speak into that and continue to push design as a creative exercise within marketing. Connection, content is the way we are able to scale our ability to make to build relationships. I think in a perfect world, we can get our CEOs on a plane or some type of teleportation device that gets them in front of every prospect, every customer in person around the world all day long. And like, we probably like do really well as a company if we're able to do that. Of course, time and space and physics and all that, right? And so content is how we can scale our ability to connect with our audience. And I think that we're seeing this big trend. In my last company, we were really focused on this idea of new media, or owned media, as I was referring to it back then, which is not just about producing a bunch of white papers or AEO articles or SEO, whatever, but actually editorial formats like this one, being able to distribute digitally and build an audience, build an owned audience, and ultimately to become known for something, right? And so I think content is just continuing to be an incredible act of leverage for building relationship at scale, and one that does not go by the way of automation in my book. Now, will we be able to get better at pre-production by leveraging Claude and ChatGPT and the others? Sure. Well, are there some great tools that are helping us edit and fix eye lines and remove background noise and all these sorts of things? Yes. So some great technology is going to help us be better storytellers, but I do not see a world that we follow the avatars online, that we humans follow the avatars online that are scaling our ability to create editorial content. That just is not, at least for me, that's not a future that I think plays out. So content and thinking about content in a modern way continues to be a huge importance. And then events. Gosh, I feel events have always been core to our ability to build connection. Going to an event in person and seeing your peers or people that you look up to, or speakers that you've wanted to connect with, there's just nothing better than an in-person connection. And we're seeing a rebellion towards online, whether it's the AI slop that is being generated and distributed at scale, whether it's logging into our feeds and not even knowing what's real anymore. So it's just the signal to noise ratio is completely blown out of proportion. I think for a lot of us, we just don't even want to engage. They're generationally, even within the Gen Z, especially within the Gen Z era or generation, there's this like flip phone trend that is happening. There's this kind of nostalgic move back to analog that I think will have a tremendous impact on how we go to market in terms of our event marketing. And so offline marketing, analog, whatever you want to refer to it, events, I think, will continue to be perhaps even in some cases, the tip of the spear for how we go to market. A few companies I know are like over-indexed on events and are saying, look, like we sell to the enterprise. We're not looking for like volume and velocity type of transactions. We're just gonna do a bunch of events and make them really great. And so I believe deeply in the power of belonging, of being together in person. I think that's gonna be a huge return in this sort of new playbook. All of these things, I think, are meant to answer the question of how do we avoid the sea of sameness? How do we stand out? How do we become known, and not just known, but known for something, so that when people think of, in my kind of previous context, they think of customer success, you think of Gainsight, because they've just become synonymous with this movement that they're waging. How do we do that? And my proposal is brand humanity is the vehicle, or some collection of these is the vehicle by which all of our kind of focus will be in this next chapter of our practice. And so again, if you like the craft side of marketing, telling stories, really using taste in terms of how we kind of show up digitally and in person, creating those moments of connection, and investing in offline, it could even be sort of a renaissance back to the art of marketing all over again. So with that being said, through the podcast, I had a chance to talk to a lot of board members, executive recruiters, some incredible voices in and around marketing about how the job is actually changing as well. And this is just a quick summary, but some of the big takeaways that I've learned is this ability to lean in career-wise to a playbook that we've spent 10, 20 more years executing And being known for that playbook isn't as relevant in a world where knowledge is to some extent commoditized, or at least accessible, right? I have a book behind me here that I wrote, and I'm like, should I just take it off the shelf? Like, does it even matter anymore to some extent? What the market is valuing, what founders, CEOs are valuing, is first principles thinking from their CMO. Being willing to get on the whiteboard, being willing to challenge a lot of their assumptions, even the ones that are in print, and say, what can this look like for us? What is a road that we can go down that might be different than what you've done in your past? And so this idea of being a first principles thinker is increasingly the top of the list for what founders and CEOs are looking for from their CMO. The other bit, of course, is a fast follow is, especially at scale, as you grow your career as a CMO, we get further and further away from the work. We're managing teams or managers of teams, and we're reporting up and out, and we're building relationships cross-functionally, and we might be on podcasts or whatever the case is, that we stop doing the marketing work. And the reality is those days might be over. Today, the market is valuing marketers, that CMOs that are hands-on, that are using Lovable, they're using Claude Work, they're using the tools, they're familiar with the evolving kind of landscape of products and services and how all these things might be strung together. And so this idea of being a doer, not just a manager of people, is certainly a big kind of leap that is happening across the practice. Third, I remember at Gainsight especially, some of the coaching was like, we need to like wear the pipeline cape. Like, we are the hero, like fire us if we don't have the right pipeline coverage going into the quarter or whatever. Like, we are all about pipeline. And increasingly, like, revenue, continue to be sort of a focal point. What I'm seeing is that's obviously true, but this idea of solving for being distinctive and becoming known for something and building a brand, telling stories, showing up, that increasingly building brand and scaling brand is becoming the sort of like tilt is happening in terms of the responsibilities there. I've seen many companies where the CMO doesn't even own pipeline anymore. That's rolling in somewhere else, and the job of the CMO is around product marketing and brand. And so again, I think this is going to be different with each company, but increasingly, I think questions are being asked in interview processes around your ability to tell a good story, build a community, and scale that connection with the audience. And finally, human-led motions into this AI-led motion. I think everyone has a data strategy. Everyone is building on top of Claude or OpenAI or whatever. And our ability to not just think about AI as an execution channel or motion for us, but even a creative sparring partner, an idea kind of partner, and figuring out how we sort of like use the technology to not just sort of blanket copy paste whatever comes out the other side of a prompt, but to really kind of be able to scale our decision making using the tools continues to be or I think increasingly is becoming a core part of the job as well. There's probably several other things, and I'm sure you all have several other in your own experience here, but these are just some of the initial trends. And so the reality that I want to sort of end on here is that no one really knows, right? Like, no one knows. I don't know. I think we're all trying to figure it out. But this is sort of the invitation, I think, for all of us is, do we think about marketing ending as like a existential threat on our careers? Do we think about playbooks perhaps gathering dust on a shelf as a disappointing outcome for us? Do we think about the idea of like relearning how to do the very job we've spent our careers building as like a tax that is stressful and something maybe we just may or may not want to do? Or do we see it as an opportunity? Do we see it as the ability to write a new playbook, one that is not written yet, candidly, or like honestly, and to do it together and to help shape the future of this practice, call it brand, call it marketing, whatever. And I think I've been on this side, and I think I've sort of like eclipsed over here a little bit. I think the idea is as we sort of see that invitation and step into it, it becomes a really exciting time to be a marketer, to bring that first principles in and to rethink how we can sort of rise to the challenge here and solve what is arguably one of the biggest existential questions of our time around being known. So if this was helpful or interesting to you, we do a show called Brand Humanity. We're going to get back on, it used to be live. Now we're going to be distributing new episodes every week starting next week. And so really excited about that. We've got some historical content right here on our website. If you just go back to the media page, don't do it now, but do it in a second, or on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. But we're continuing this conversation, right? Like this a lot of what I'm learning is informed by talking to others that are either agreeing or disagreeing or kind of pushing the boundary of like what marketing looks like. And so the podcast is our recurring weekly moment where we try to kind of learn with some really special guests.